My name is Samantha, and I've been working in Europe for about a year now. It's been a time full of changes, and despite the challenges, they've turned out to be overwhelmingly positive for me. New experiences, new people, a different rhythm of life. All of this has become part of my new beginning, something I had dreamed of for so long. I left my family behind, my parents and my younger sister, Janet. To be honest, we were never particularly close. Our relationship always felt strained, like taut strings on the verge of snapping. With Janet, we had a unique dynamic, if you could even call it that. She's 8 years younger than me, and the age gap always created a divide between us. While I was dealing with high school dramas, she was still playing with dolls. By the time she hit her teenage years, I had already graduated from college and was building a career in finance. We were like residents of two different planets, crossing paths only on holidays or at family dinners. In recent years, our conversations had dwindled to sporadic birthday or Christmas messages. Before moving, I lived in an apartment that had been passed down in our family from my grandmother. After college, I started working for a financial company that paid well. A few years of steady income made me want to invest in my own place. One evening during dinner, my mom casually mentioned that my grandmother's apartment, which they had been renting out, still belonged to the family. They offered to sell it to me, and the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that it was the perfect option. That apartment was a part of my childhood. I knew every corner, every crack in the walls. My grandmother and I spent countless Sundays there, watering her flowers on the balcony, enjoying her signature chocolate cookies. The price my parents offered was fair, and I didn't hesitate. I invested $120,000 to make it my home. It became my safe haven for the next 3 years. When the opportunity to move to Europe arose, I didn't hesitate for long. The new position not only offered a higher salary but also a chance to see the world and take on new challenges. I decided to keep the apartment as my first serious investment. It could serve as a safety net in case I ever wanted to return home. Now, I was living in Brussels. My new apartment was cozy but entirely different. I was sitting at the kitchen table, going through work emails, when my phone suddenly vibrated. Janet's name lit up on the screen. I froze. We hadn't had a real conversation in ages, and the call was so unexpected that I just stared at the screen for a moment. My first thought was, did something happen? Hello, I answered, struggling to hide the surprise in my voice. Samantha. Janet sounded cheerful, which eased my nerves a little. How are you? How's work? Have you met anyone special? She fired off questions one after another, as if we were close sisters who chatted every day. Her enthusiasm was disorienting. I told her that work was going well and admitted honestly that I was focused on my career and unsure when I'd be able to visit home. That's great, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. I just started college, Janet announced with the kind of excitement that made it feel like a victory she was proud of. Mom and Dad said. They didn't tell me, I interrupted, trying to keep my voice steady, though a twinge of unease began to stir inside me. We haven't exactly been in touch much lately. Well, I have, she continued with the kind of casual ease that was starting to grate on me. And guess what? I talked to Mom and Dad, and they said I could live in your apartment while I'm in college. Isn't that great? I froze, gripping my phone tighter as Janet went on, outlining her plans. It's only 2 blocks from campus, she added, as if that made her suggestion all the more reasonable. I won't have to spend money on transportation, and I won't have to pay rent. It would really help me out. Her breezy way of delivering such news threw me off balance. My heart started to race, and I took a deep breath to keep myself from snapping. Janet, hold on a second, I cut into her stream of enthusiastic plans. You can't just move in there. You should have asked me first, not Mom and Dad. But they said it was fine, she said, genuinely sounding puzzled, as though I were the one being unreasonable. I pinched the bridge of my nose, feeling irritation welling up inside me. "Because you need my permission, not theirs," I replied sharply, trying to keep my voice calm. "You can't just move in because they said so." "But they said," she began. "I don't care what they said," I interrupted, my voice involuntarily rising. I immediately regretted my tone and tried to soften it. "Look, Janet, I understand you're trying to figure out your housing situation, but this isn't going to work." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Janet spoke again, her voice was surprisingly steady, almost reasonable, like Mom's when she was trying to convince me of something. "I don't see why not," she said. "You're in Europe now, and the apartment is sitting empty anyway." "It's not empty," I corrected her. "And what happens if I decide to come back home? I could return from Europe at any moment. Where would I live then?" Janet let out a short laugh, a sound that made me clench my teeth. "Well, Samantha," she said with light irony, "you're earning good money. If you come back, you can always rent another apartment. That's not a problem, is it?" I froze in silence, stunned by her words. Her audacity, the assumption that I should give up my home so she could live there for free, left me momentarily speechless. "No," I said firmly, my voice cold and clear. "Absolutely not. I'm not renting another apartment just so you can live there. It's not going to happen, Janet." "But Mom and Dad—" "I don't care what Mom and Dad said," I nearly shouted. "The answer is no." Without waiting for her response, I hung up. The phone landed on the table with a soft click, and my hands were trembling visibly. I closed my eyes, trying to calm the anger boiling inside me. For the next few hours, I tried to distract myself with work, but my thoughts kept drifting back to our conversation. Knowing my family, I realized this was far from over. Nothing ever ended with just one conversation in our family. And, of course, my fears were justified. Just as I was reheating last night's leftovers, my phone vibrated again. Mom's name lit up on the screen. I stared at it, exhaled deeply and slowly, then picked up. "Hello?" I finally said, answering the call. "Samantha," my mother's voice had that particular tone I recognized instantly. It was the tone she always used when she wanted to let me know I'd done something wrong. The tone that made me feel like a teenager who had just broken curfew. "We need to talk about Janet." I sank onto the couch, setting aside my plate of reheated dinner. Clearly, this wasn't going to be a short conversation. "Yes, I think we should," I replied dryly. "I don't understand why you're being so stubborn," she began reproachfully. "You shouldn't treat your sister this way. She's family. It's just for a little while she's in college. Nothing bad will happen if Janet stays in your apartment." I ran a hand through my hair, trying to keep my composure. "Mom, I can't just let her move in," I said, keeping my voice restrained. "And what happens if she actually does? I don't want to end up fighting with her and then trying to kick her out." "Oh, stop being so dramatic," Mom chuckled, though irritation was evident in her voice. "That won't happen." "You don't know that," I retorted sharply. "Besides, why can't you and Dad help her rent a place? Why does it have to be my apartment?" There was a brief pause on the other end. When Mom spoke again, her voice sounded more tired. "We've already spent all our money on Janet's college tuition," she admitted. "We can't afford to pay for rent on top of that." I got up and began pacing the living room, feeling my patience slip further with each passing second. "Well, I don't want her living there," I said crisply. "Who knows what might happen to the apartment? And besides, I'm renting it out right now. It's bringing me income. If Janet moves in, I'll lose that income and still have to cover the bills while she lives there for free." "It's only temporary," Mom said softly, but I cut her off. If it's so important, are you and Dad planning to pay me rent so Janet can live there? I knew my tone was growing sharper by the second, but I couldn't stop myself. The silence on the other end was deafening. Then Mom's voice came back, sharp and almost angry. I can't believe how selfish and cold-hearted you've become. You're demanding rent from your own sister. She's your family, Samantha. How can you be so cold? I felt the heat rise to my cheeks, and my heart began to pound harder. Selfish? I practically hissed. How is it selfish to want to keep my own apartment? The apartment I paid for with my own money? Or have you forgotten that I paid you and Dad $120,000 for it? That's not the point, she snapped. On the contrary, it's exactly the point. I interrupted, practically shouting now. I didn't get that apartment as a gift. I worked hard, saved my money, and bought it from you. My money, Mom. My hard-earned money. The silence on the other end was palpable. Then the line went dead. Mom had hung up. The following week passed in a strange, tense silence. No calls, no messages, neither from Mom nor Janet. I tried to focus on work, to bury myself in tasks, but I couldn't shake the unpleasant knot in my stomach. Every time my phone vibrated, I flinched, expecting to see a familiar name on the screen. But it was only colleagues, friends, or notifications. One day, in the middle of a presentation at work, my phone started vibrating in my pocket. I ignored the call, but whoever it was kept calling again and again. During my lunch break, I finally checked the missed calls. It was Aunt Sarah, Mom's younger sister. We had never been particularly close, but Aunt Sarah had always been the voice of reason whenever there were disputes in our family. I took a deep breath and called her back. Samantha. Her voice was calm, but I could detect hints of tension. What the hell is going on with your family? I just got off the phone with your mother. She's absolutely beside herself. I sighed and shut the door to my office, trying to gather my thoughts. Inside, the space was a mess, stacks of papers, a forgotten coffee mug with cold liquid inside. I sank into my chair and took a deep breath, bracing myself for the conversation with Aunt Sarah. Well, tell me what's going on over there, she said, her tone more concerned than judgmental. For the next 20 minutes, I told her everything, from Janet's call to Mom's heated reaction. Bit by bit, I laid out the entire story. Aunt Sarah stayed silent, occasionally making small sounds to show she was listening attentively. I see, she said once I finished. Have you tried talking to Janet again? Why? I asked, leaning back in my chair, exhausted. What's there to misunderstand? They want to give my apartment to Janet. End of story. Sweetheart, her voice was soft but firm. Things aren't always as simple as they seem. Call her again. Better yet, do a video call so you can see each other. Try to understand what she means and make sure she understands you. I wanted to argue, but something in her tone gave me pause. Maybe she was right. Maybe a face-to-face conversation would help clear things up. That evening, after work, I made up my mind. Taking a deep breath, I pressed the video call button. Janet answered almost immediately. It surprised me. I had expected her to ignore my attempt to reach out. Her face appeared on the screen. Tired, with a hint of irritation, but lacking the defiance I'd sensed in her voice before. Her hair, usually neatly styled, was pulled back into a messy ponytail. Hi, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Can we talk? Janet nodded, her expression remaining reserved. I need to understand something, I began cautiously. Why are you so insistent on living in that apartment? Why not rent a place of your own? Her face tensed slightly, her eyebrows drawing together in an expression of stubbornness. Why should I rent somewhere else when Mom and Dad said I could stay there? She said indignantly. You lived in that apartment for 4 years. Now it's my turn. They said it's fine. Her words hit me like a slap. Their apartment? My turn? What nonsense was this? Their apartment? I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. Yes, she confirmed, lifting her chin as if preparing to defend herself. Mom and Dad's apartment. They inherited it from Grandma. Remember? They said I could stay there while I'm in college. Just like you. For a moment, I froze, staring at the screen. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief, but I didn't let it show. Quietly, I reached for my laptop and quickly opened the folder I needed. Janet, I need to show you something, I said, enabling screen sharing. I opened the folder with the documents for the apartment, scrolling through the files so she could see everything. Then I found the purchase agreement and zoomed in on it. Here, I said, pointing to the screen. This isn't Mom and Dad's apartment. They sold it to me. Look at the date. Look at the amount. Janet leaned closer to the screen, her face gradually losing color. Her eyes widened, and her mouth fell slightly open. That's impossible, she whispered. They told me. They. Her voice trailed off. She shook her head as if trying to dispel unwelcome thoughts. This doesn't make any sense, she said finally, her voice trembling. Why would they lie? How could they forget that they sold the apartment to you? I watched as her expression shifted, growing more confused by the second. She looked lost, pale, and somehow younger. It was as if she had reverted to being the little girl she once was. Suddenly, I felt a surge of sympathy. Janet no longer seemed like a stubborn kid but someone who had also been deceived in her own way. Well, I said, trying to ease the tension, at least the money went to a good cause. Mom said they used it to pay for your college tuition. Janet looked at me as if I had just revealed some terrible secret to her. The money from selling the apartment, she asked, as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. Yes, I confirmed. Mom said that's how they were able to pay for your education. She raised a hand to her face as if trying to process the information. Janet let out a strange laugh, one that sounded more like a sob. Samantha, she said, her voice trembling slightly, I'm on a full scholarship. Mom and Dad haven't spent a cent on my education. Now it was my turn to stare at her in shock. My mind was racing. Just last week, Mom had told me they couldn't help Janet with rent because they had spent all their money on her college tuition. She had sounded so confident, so sincere, that I hadn't doubted her for a second. We both sat there in stunned silence, trying to process this new revelation. Finally, Janet spoke again, her voice even quieter, almost a whisper. Do you remember when I wanted to take dance lessons in middle school? She asked, avoiding looking directly at the camera. Mom told me they couldn't afford it because they had just bought you a new laptop for college. I shook my head, disbelief washing over me. A laptop? I repeated. Janet, I bought that laptop myself. I saved up for it working all summer. Mom and Dad didn't help me. Janet frowned, her face tense as if she were trying to piece together something that no longer made sense in her head. And do you remember that summer camp I really wanted to go to? She continued. The one where all my friends were going. Mom said they couldn't pay for it because they had just covered the cost of your college applications. I nodded silently, feeling a chill run down my spine. I paid for all my applications myself, I admitted after a moment. I even applied for fee waivers because I couldn't afford to pay for everything at once. Janet's face darkened. They told me they couldn't pay for the camp because they had just bought your school uniform, she added. I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. A school uniform? We didn't even have uniforms at my school. We both fell silent, as if each of us was afraid to uncover yet another truth that would shatter the remnants of our belief in our parents' honesty. But the conversation continued on its own. We spent the next hour exchanging stories, each more shocking than the last. A pattern began to emerge. Every time one of us had asked for something, our parents would say no, claiming they had just spent money on the other. "They told me they paid for your school trips," I added. But now I realized that wasn't true either. Janet nodded, and a strange expression crossed her face. It was like trying to assemble a puzzle where none of the pieces fit. The picture we had believed in since childhood was falling apart. By the time our conversation ended, I could no longer bear the weight of these revelations. The next morning, I decided to reach out for advice. "Aunt Sarah," I said as soon as she picked up the phone, "I talked to Janet last night, and we uncovered something strange." "What is it?" she asked cautiously. "Mom and Dad lied to us. For years. They told each of us that they couldn't do or buy something because they had just spent the money on the other sister. But it wasn't true. And more than that, they told Janet the apartment still belongs to them, even though they sold it to me years ago. And they told me the money from the sale went toward Janet's tuition, but she's on a full scholarship. None of it adds up." I fell silent, feeling a lump rising in my throat. On the other end of the line, I heard Aunt Sarah let out a heavy sigh. "Samantha, sweetheart," she began with quiet regret in her voice, "sit down. I need to tell you something about your parents." I obediently sank onto the couch, feeling my heart start to race. "I should have told you this years ago," she continued. "But I didn't want to cause trouble in the family. Now I think it's time you knew the truth. The truth about how your parents have really treated you and Janet." I froze, feeling her words, slow and deliberate, opening a door to something dark and unexpected. I sat on the couch, gripping my phone so tightly that my fingers began to go numb. The room was silent, with only the muffled sounds from the street outside reminding me that the world was still moving on. Aunt Sarah's silence stretched on, feeling like an eternity, before she finally spoke again. Her voice was quiet, heavy with regret, as though each word weighed her down. "Your parents, they weren't who you thought they were, Samantha. They weren't struggling to make ends meet, as they always claimed." I frowned, feeling a growing unease take root inside me. "What do you mean?" I asked, unsure if I even wanted to hear the answer. "Your grandmother," she continued, carefully choosing her words, "used to give them money. Every month. A significant amount. She set it aside specifically for you and Janet." I tightened my grip on the phone, trying to process what she was saying. "For us?" I asked, my voice trembling. "She wanted to make sure her granddaughters were provided for," Aunt Sarah explained. "But your parents spent that money on themselves. The bare minimum went to you and Janet. They bought cheap groceries, only brought home the essentials, and the rest." She trailed off, and I felt my whole body tense as though bracing for a blow that hadn't yet landed. "The rest went toward their own needs, didn't it?" I prompted, though part of me desperately wanted to avoid hearing the answer. "They lived like royalty," Aunt Sarah admitted. "They ate at expensive restaurants, shopped at designer boutiques, and regularly went on lavish trips. All those business trips they talked about, they weren't real, Samantha. Those were vacations. They left you with your grandmother, saying the places they were going weren't suitable for kids. Meanwhile, they were enjoying themselves at 5-star resorts." My stomach twisted into a tight knot. I thought back to the countless times they'd left us with Grandma, their designer luggage neatly packed in the trunk of the car. I'd always wondered why they came back so relaxed and tanned. Now everything was painfully clear, and the realization made me want to scream. "How did you find out?" I barely managed to get the words out. Aunt Sarah let out a heavy sigh. "It was an accident," she said. "One day, I ran into your mother at a restaurant. A very expensive one. She was wearing a new designer outfit, jewelry I'd never seen before. She was supposed to be on a business trip. When I asked her about it, she froze at first, but then her voice faltered, and for a moment there was silence on the line. She threatened me, Samantha, Aunt Sarah continued. She said that if I ever told your grandmother anything, she'd make sure Grandma believed I was trying to turn the family against her. That I'd be cut out of the inheritance. Your mother was a master manipulator. She always knew how to convince people she was right. A chill ran down my spine. And you stayed quiet? All this time? My voice was laced with accusation, but I couldn't help it. You knew and didn't say anything? We had a massive fight about it, she said, her voice heavy with pain. After that, your mother and I didn't speak for years. I was scared. I'm so ashamed of it now, Samantha. I should have said something, I should have done something. But I didn't. And I'm sorry. She fell silent, and in that silence, I could hear a whole ocean of regret. You and Janet deserved better. You deserved to know the truth. I sat in stunned silence as her words sank in, heavy as stones, sinking deeper and deeper into my mind. All the memories of us living frugally, of cheap gifts, of modest celebrations, began to intertwine with this new knowledge, swirling into a vortex of bitterness and confusion. Why? The question stuck in my throat like a shard of glass. Why would they do this to us? Why had we spent our entire lives being nothing more than a convenient cover for their indulgence? It was all a lie. My parents weren't struggling to make ends meet. They were wasting money. Just not on us. I couldn't believe it. We lived so frugally, I finally choked out. Mom spent hours cutting coupons, telling us we had to be careful with money. They never took us on a single vacation. Not once. Everything Janet and I had came from thrift stores or discount shops. Even our groceries. I let out a bitter laugh, remembering how Mom would drive across town to a cheaper supermarket, explaining that every penny mattered. I got up and began pacing the room, too agitated to sit still. And do you know what's worse? I continued, ignoring Aunt Sarah's attempts to interject. They made us feel guilty for wanting anything normal, anything that other kids wanted. They gave us lectures about being materialistic whenever we asked for new clothes or money for school trips. My speech was becoming faster and louder, as though I needed to pour out all the years of disappointment and suppressed resentment. And this whole thing with college, I added bitterly. Since I was a kid, they drilled it into me that they didn't have the money to help me with my education. I had to figure it out on my own. They told me I had to be the best to get a scholarship, because otherwise, I wouldn't be able to go anywhere. My voice shook with tension as memories of how I had pushed myself for perfect grades flashed through my mind. The fear of failure, the sleepless nights before exams, the endless competitions and academic contests, all of it came crashing down on me like a heavy weight. I spent all of high school in constant anxiety, I said, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. Just trying to prove I could do it. And now you're telling me that Grandma left the money specifically for college for Janet and me? That it was part of the inheritance conditions? Aunt Sarah sighed heavily. Yes, she confirmed. She set aside a significant amount to pay for both of your educations. That was her explicit instruction. The phone nearly slipped from my weakening fingers. I sank onto the couch, feeling like the world around me was falling apart. But we both went to school on scholarships, I muttered. They never gave us a single penny for our education. They told us they couldn't afford it. They kept all the money for themselves, Aunt Sarah said quietly. Just like they kept the money your grandmother sent every month for your upbringing. The next morning, I called my boss and requested emergency leave. My voice must have sounded so subdued that he immediately approved it without question. 48 hours later, I was sitting on a plane headed home. Janet met me at the airport. Her face was tense, her movements abrupt. We spent the entire drive to her dorm talking about what Aunt Sarah had revealed. "I can't believe they did this to us," Janet said, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. "All this time, they made us feel guilty for just wanting anything." Her voice trembled, but there was more than just anger in it. There was heartbreak. "They looked us in the eyes and lied," she continued, as though afraid to stop speaking for fear of drowning in her own thoughts. "Lied about every dollar they supposedly didn't have. Meanwhile, they were living like royalty." I stayed silent because I had no words left in my mind. All I could do was listen as Janet's voice, filled with pain, echoed through my own thoughts. We arrived at our parents' house that same day. It was strange how everything looked exactly as it always had, the manicured lawn, perfectly trimmed, as if prepared for an inspection, the expensive car parked in the driveway, gleaming in the morning sun. It was the same car they called a necessary business expense. I wondered how much of their lies we had taken as truth over the years. Mom opened the door with her usual smile, but her expression shifted the moment she saw us together. "Girls," she said uncertainly. "What's going on?" "We need to talk," I said firmly, brushing past her into the house. She didn't try to stop us, but followed us down the hallway, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floor. "Your father's in his office," she added, clearly confused about why we were there. We walked into the office, where Dad sat at his desk, reading something on his tablet. He looked up when he saw us, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "Well, this is unexpected," he said, setting the tablet aside. "We know everything," I said without preamble. "About the money Grandma gave you every month. About the money she set aside specifically for our education. About all of it." A heavy silence settled over the room. I saw Mom's face darken, while Dad slowly crossed his arms over his chest, his expression remaining cold and composed. "Aunt Sarah told us," Janet added, her voice steady but with a slight tremble underneath. "She told us how you spent that money on yourselves. On fancy restaurants, luxurious vacations, while we ate cheap groceries and wore second-hand clothes." I stood still, waiting for our parents to defend themselves, or at least show a shred of guilt. But instead, Mom shrugged and adjusted her expensive blouse. "I don't see what there is to discuss," she said indifferently. "We fed you, clothed you, raised you. No one can say we didn't take care of you." "Didn't take care of us?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You took the money Grandma gave you specifically for us and spent it on yourselves." "We lived the way we deserved," Dad said calmly, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Your money?" Janet's voice shook with anger. "That was Grandma's money. She gave it to you for us." Mom waved her hand dismissively, the gesture as nonchalant as her words. "What's done is done. The money is gone anyway." I felt her words hit me like a slap in the face. The ease with which they admitted everything, showing not the slightest hint of shame or remorse, was unbearable. "You're not even trying to deny it," I said quietly. "You just don't care, do you?" Mom looked at me with mild irritation, as if I'd just asked her an inconvenient question at a boring party. "You're right," I said, suddenly feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. "The money is gone. But so is our relationship with you." I turned to Janet, and she nodded. We both walked out of the house without looking back. That was 6 months ago. A lot has changed since then. Everything is different now. In many ways, better. Janet and I talk almost every day. I helped her find a nice apartment close to campus and have been paying her rent. It's the least I can do for her. Janet got a job at a local coffee shop to cover her other expenses. She insisted on it, wanting to be as independent as possible. Last week, We had dinner together at her apartment. The small kitchen was cozy, and the table was overflowing with dishes we had cooked together. We laughed, talked for hours, shared memories, and made plans for the future. Looking at her across the table, I realized something. Our parents might have stolen our money, but in their attempt to divide us, they accidentally gave us something far more valuable. They brought us closer than ever before.